Metro Manila and its suburbs, the unfinished story of the unbuilt capital of an incomplete nation. Because I can never put the beginning and the end, and as happens with most academics or former academics, you can never stop finding new material to put into your work. But the main question people ask me all the time, because of my writing in the Star and Blueprint, and now I'm on Facebook, I have 5,000 friends, sorry, I can't friend you anymore, is my thing is cities, and especially Metro Manila and other cities in the Philippines, and finding out why we're this way. In fact, the title of my column is City Sense, because over 12 years ago when I started it, I wanted to make sense of the city, which until now does not make any sense. And so people always tell me, why is Metro Manila like this? And why don't we have any plans? It seems that everything is haphazard, chaotic, there's no here nor there. But I tell them, yes, it is chaotic, but no, it's not true that there were no plans. There were, in fact, by my count, at least 10. 12 if you count all of the unbuilt, 12 or 13, including the unbuilt fantasy cities of Madame Imelda and other people. But we start first in the Spanish period, because urbanization started as a way of being colonized or being put under Bao de las Campañas, underneath the bells. We were controlled by urbanism. And the primary example is, of course, Manila, with its gridded streets, put together under the template called the Laws of the Indies, from Mother Spain through Mexico. And the distinction of the Laws of the Indies is that you have a quadricilio, or a grid of streets with all of the edifices or structures of government, commerce, and residences around public open space. The plazas, usually a Plaza Mayor and a smaller plaza, surrounded often by walls or fortifications. And this is Manila in the 19th century. I jumped very quickly 200 or 300 centuries, 200 or 300 years to the 19th century, because at that time, Spain had lost most of their colonies except for the farthest ones, including the Philippines, and they thought also because of the opening up of the world to global commerce that they should do something about their colonies, and hence put in progress. And part of that progress is in the reworking of the city, which up to that time was still very small. So they had a grand plan in the 19th century for the extramuros. Intramuros is, of course, inside the walls, extramuros outside the walls. And in the 19th century, urbanism as redefined in Europe by the works of Spanish planners like Cerdà and French urbanists like Haussmann, were transforming European cities to adapt to the new technologies and to expanding populations. So that got to us late in the 19th century, and there were actually plans to extend Intramuros to its arrabales, which are its suburbs. And you can see here, Binondo had already developed because that was the center of commerce. And Spain had thought of improving the port. We did not have the South and North Harbor at the time, because most of the goods were shipped in and brought in through lighters or cascos into the muelles or the quays. And this is where all the warehouses were, and the customs. This is the center of political and religious power at the residences of most of the different quarters were in the arrabales. This is a graphic showing the plans that had been made in Spain or in the Philippines, but approved in Spain, of the improvements. This actually is a map showing the tranvia system, which was introduced, or the tram system, which was introduced in the late 19th century. And the first franchise holder, of course, was a Mr. Sobel. And the trams were drawn not by electric motors or steam, but by horses. So improvements already can be seen in the streets. in the settings for the monuments, this is the mouth of the Pasig River, where the Del Pran Bridge is now. And you can see that the Pasig River was clean and deep. It had not been silted. The large steamers could actually go until the Puente España, or the Bridge of Spain, and that was where, on both sides of which, you had the muelles, or the quays. This is a plan in 1898 showing a projected new harbor, which is the South Harbor, eventually taken over by the Americans to address the booming commerce and trade, with Manila as the center in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia. And you can see the extensions of Avenida Rizal. Of course, it was not called Avenida Rizal at the time. And the new districts of Ermita and Malate, the city expanding to the south, to the north, to the east, with Quiapo, Binondo, Santa Cruz, San Miguel, all the way to Sampaloc as the centers of residences and commerce, and the Pasig as the main highway. We had no north diversion or south SLEX or NLEX. We had Pasig, which was the connector between Manila and its surrounding area all the way in to the Great Lake, and the terminus, which was the town of Bai. That's why it's called Laguna de Bai. So this is the primary city of the colony, or the country, surrounded by the countryside, which was, in terms of the Romans, its latifundia. In fact, the modern term is the carbon footprint. So the city needed that surrounding area to sustain it. And that's the connection within the countryside and the city. The countryside provided both the food and the manpower that made the city work. So these were the plans, but of course, as everyone knows, something happened in the late 1900s, and the Americans took over where the Spanish left off. Of course, there was an exchange of about $20 million and the sale of the friar lands. And Americans, when they came in, because Manila had been devastated by the two wars preceding it, and by the fact that not much infrastructure had been accomplished because of the war, so that Manila was not fit to be the capital of their imperial extension. And so they brought in Daniel Burnham in 1904, in November of 1904, to look at Manila and provide a grand master plan similar to what he had just done for Washington, D.C. Burnham had put together a plan for the new capital. At the same time, he was doing the master plans for other cities like Cleveland and San Francisco. In fact, on the way to Manila, he passed by San Francisco, looked at his work, went on the ship, visited Manila, ate about a dozen meals with all of the families at the time, went up to Baguio and saw that, came down, was again given a round of all the dinners, and he left about 50 pounds heavier, but with enough inspiration, because he saw that Manila had a wonderful bay, which he likened to the Bay of Naples, the Esteros, which he likened to the canals of Venice, and heritage in terms of the walls and the architecture, which was his first advice to the authorities, was keep the walls, keep the heritage architecture, and build around that. And that's what he did. He built around Intramuros, introducing a central civic space, which is the Luneta, from which radiated wide avenues and boulevards, much like Washington, D.C., and of course its inspiration, which is Paris, Vienna, St. Petersburg, in a style that's called the City Beautiful, a movement that predated the start of modern urban planning in Europe and the United States. This is a cleaner version of that plan that shows how detailed the master plan for Manila was. In 04-05, it was approved by the American Congress in 1905, and work on it actually started by the government trying to consolidate all of the land that was required to block up all the streets and to connect all of the districts. The elements of the plan, aside from conserving all of the heritage, was a rational and efficient transport system. What they called means of communication was then means of bringing people from one end of the city to the other. Is the basis of what we have now. Another very important part of the Burnham Plan was the stipulation that the city had to have parks and open spaces. And he provided for 4 large parks, each of which was about 100 hectares in size, because that was going to be a cumulative total area of about 400 hectares, proportionate to the area of Manila, and in fact, about the same size of Central Park in New York. And the 4 parks were Harrison Park to the south, Santa Ana Park, Sampaloc Park, and another park which he called the resort in the then pristine beaches of Tondo, because then nothing was polluted. If you look at all of the surveys that the Americans had done at the turn of the century, you will see listed coral, 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 fish, 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 everything. That's the first thing they did, of course, was to send over the surveyors so they knew what they had or bought for $20 million. Anyway, this is a detailed plan showing the intramuros, all of the walls conserved. Actually, the Americans had already demolished the Maestranza area because they had not enough stone for the improvements of the roads. But Burnham and the consulting architect that he had assigned, William E. Parsons, stopped that, and the walls were conserved, at least until the Second World War. And the central space that he saw was converted to the Civic Center of Manila. And the model for that is Washington, D.C. If you go to D.C., the width of the mall is the same, but the total length is about 1/3 of Washington, D.C.'s. But we were supposed to be, as Little Brown Brothers, also have a Little Brown model of American capital. In fact, this is Washington, D.C. As you note, it's a grand mall with an axis, very Baroque, from the Capitol to a monument, which is in this case Washington, and on the other side to the Pennsylvania Avenue, which is the White House. So you have the executive, the legislative, and at the time that the original plan was put together by Charles Pierre L'Enfant in 1792, the judiciary was not yet considered the 3rd branch. But in Manila, Burnham put the 3rd branch. So we were supposed to have exactly the same thing, even a Capitolio, or a Capitol. And if we had built it at the time, it would have only cost 10 million pesos, which most of you have in your ATMs now, or Corona in his pocket. But it was not built. What happened in 1912, as this project was going to come online, a new president was voted in, and instead of a Republican, we got a Democrat. So whenever the Republicans come, they go and wage wars and try and conquer territory. When it's a Democrat, they just have sex scandals. So we even broadcast to the world by the medium, the most popular medium of the time, a World's Fair. In 1915, they brought, the government officials brought a model of the planned center of Manila to the 1915 Pan-Pacific exhibition in San Francisco. This shows a circle with the Capitol. This is the reflecting pool. It's here, but you can't really see it. It's the Rizal Monument, which is our version of Washington, but proportionately smaller. And the Capitol, this is now the Agrifina Circle, because the plans again, since the Americans fairly abandoned us to our own devices, only 2 buildings were built, Agriculture and Finance, which today is the National Museum and the Department of Tourism, and hence the Agrifina Circle. Years later, decades later, when, and I jump in the story to Quezon City, Luneta was turned into a park, and you can still see the remnants of the original design, which is the main mall, Rizal, and the buildings, but no Capitol. So what happened? Despite the fact that the Americans abandoned, we were left to our own devices. They told us we were going to have independence. We had a Commonwealth. We had some money, and parts of the Burnham Plan was implemented, including the building of civic structures in the neoclassic style, and this is one of the most beautiful of them, which is the post office. The news is that soon it will be turned into a 6-star hotel. And the Jones Bridge, again, based on the model of one of the bridges in the Seine and Pasig in Paris, the Metropolitan Theater, the Mahan Gardens, which is our first public park, and the City Hall, which you don't see because it's still a small building in the early 1930s, which was replaced by a more modern structure. So this is Paris, the model of Manila. But no, I always show this picture. This is not Paris, it's actually Manila in the 1930s. We had grand avenues with large shade trees. We had modern edifices, a tram system that at its peak carried 7 million Filipinos every year, which made it very efficient and the main mode of transport for Manilans at the time. This is Paris, that's Manila. Paris, Manila. Separated at birth and now permanently separated. You know that it's before the war also because they were driving on the wrong side. We had to switch during the liberation because the American tanks kept running over our trucks and our calesas. Other structures were built of commerce and government, including the Insular Ice Plant, one of the first things that they built because the Americans needed to keep their steaks fresh and their beer cold. In fact, related to all of that is the medical advisory to all of the civilian officials that came over and the officers of the army. When you drink the water in Manila, you take the water, you put it in a pot, you boil it. Once it boils, you cool down, boil it again, right? And once you boil it twice, you throw the water and you drink the beer because the water was really bad. This is the first park, Mahan Gardens, named after John C. Mahan, who came over as a volunteer fighting the war against the Filipinos, ended up as one of the officials, and he was in charge of sanitation, public safety, and cemeteries. In fact, one of the cemeteries that he did move eventually got turned into a popular rotunda we now call Remedios. It was a cemetery. So this is one of my favorite posters of Manila showing that the Americans had succeeded in part to turn Manila into one of the most cosmopolitan destinations in Southeast Asia, just next to Shanghai. And you see the Manila Hotel, the Walled City, the Hippodrome, Fort San Pedro, if I'm not mistaken, San Antonio Abad, which is inside the Central Bank, Rojas Bolivar, or Dewey Boulevard at the time, the Luneta, and somewhere here is the world's largest cabaret, which was a popular haunt of Manuel Alcazaren. And the first clipper to cross from the United States, the Pacific Clipper, ferried people over to our side. If you watch Indiana Jones, we appear for about 2 seconds. But not only Manila was planned, almost all of the major towns and cities in the Philippines had a rational plan based on principles of efficient circulation and functionality as well as aesthetics. So this is Cebu, which shows the old city again with the fort conserved, Colon, which is Chinatown district, and an extension to the Capitol building, provincial capital, which was eventually built, and the rest of the city gridded in a rational manner. If you look from the air at Cebu, parts of this were actually implemented, although the reclaimed area was only built in the 1960s. This is Davao, again similar. And so all throughout the decades from the turn of the century to about the 1950s, we had rational plans for all of our towns and cities until it all disappeared. So plans 3 and 4, in 1930 to 1940, the plan was revisited twice. In 1930, this is the revised plan that showed that the plan was actually being implemented and that people were concerned in how the city was developing in terms of locations of industry, locations of commerce, even locations of the houses of ill repute, which was transferred from Tondo to Sampaloc. Anyone know here what the ladies of the night were called then? I'm sure Butch knows the term in Spanish, in the Spanish era. They were called doves in Spanish, palomas. And in the American period, they had moved to Sampaloc, and they were called Margarets. I have no idea why. So the revisions of the plan showing the build-out, but not all of the areas consolidated. What happened, as would happen in all of the plans, the price of the land went up, shot up, and speculation brought the prices even higher. So government was unable to consolidate enough land, especially for the main elements of the civic centers and the open spaces. This is a blow-up of one of the end of the plan showing Malate, and this is Harrison Park. That showed how detailed the plan was. And in 1940, the last person to look at the plan was a Harvard graduate named Angel Nakpil, who reviewed the plan and was going to implement this revised plan until the war broke out. So it was a very rational plan. It had all of the streets in an efficient, laid out in an efficient manner. This big block is, of course, the UST. And you see the train lines that were supposed to connect the Paco Station and Tutuban. Originally, it was supposed to be the north and south terminals, but they ran out of money again, and they had to connect. They had to downgrade Paco into a terminal and connect to Tutuban, which was the main station. But Manila got crowded, speculation pushed prices up, and so you had to go out into the suburbs, and therefore you had all of the suburbs starting in the early 20s and late 20s and 30s, like San Juan Heights and Addition Hills, aside from other developments outside of the property line of the city. And so we come to plan number 5, which is the Frost-Arellano plan. And I have 3 minutes left to tell you the next 50 years. And the Frost-Arellano plan was meant to move the capital into another site because Manila was already considered crowded, and it had all of the problems, including flooding, including crime, including pollution. And so Quezon City was born, a distance of 15 kilometers inside. Why? Because 15 kilometers was the maximum distance of a battleship gun. At the time, that was the highest technology, and to be free from the dangers of being overrun by occupying forces, it had to be 15 kilometers inland. Of course, they didn't think about bombers. So EDSA, what we know as EDSA now, is about the 15-kilometer line, and the new capital was shifted to a large 25-hectare elliptical. I don't say elliptical circle because that's redundant. Elliptical that would house the new Congress and center of government. This is a blow-up of the ellipse with buildings that were supposed to house our legislature, Congress, and Senate, and a large park in which was the University of the Philippines. And that tertiary institution was meant to be the only educational facility in that area. The planners had not wanted anyone else to settle here until the Tuazons gave some of that land away. They bought the land from the Tuazons for the humongous price of 5 centavos per square meter. Of course, when the plans were made public, that shot up through the roof. And again, government was unable to buy enough land to fulfill the plan of Arellano and Frost. And, of course, Manuel L. Quezon. This is a blow-up of the Cubao area. This is Cubao. This is Kamuning, Camyas Kamuning. This is South Avenue. And I show this because for those of you in environmental sciences, you see that all of the easements of all of the waterways have wide spaces left to be green, as it should. In fact, when I showed this at a conference last year, scientist, I think Mahar came over and told me that these areas that show the easements were almost exactly the same areas that flooded in Ondoy. If we had followed the 1941 plan, we would have been less open to all of these disasters, which is a recurring story in all of the plans of Manila. Including Quezon City, you see the ellipse, Quezon 19 de Junio, as the original name of EDSA was, birthday of Rizal, and the first workers' housing, because this was intended to be a workers' housing paradise along with civil servants around the center of government. And so what happened? Before we could implement everything, Quezon had enough money because of the windfall profits from the return of the coconut levy, war. And so he used that money to he brought MacArthur in, he armed the Philippine army. This was the last time, of course, that our army was fully equipped. Of course, they ran out of funds here. But the boots were made of ang tibay boots. Anyway, so what happened after 3.5 years, the Americans came back, or MacArthur came back to reclaim his penthouse at the Manila Hotel, depending on who you read. But that's a 500-pound bomb dropping into Intramuros. That's the Agripina Circle, Isla de Profesor, Malacanang, the Pasig River. So what happened? All these wonderful structures, and the intent for Manila became post-war Manila. And the Americans had promised us $200 million+ to reconstruct our cities and our country, but of course, it eventually ended up to less than $20 million and about 2,000 jeeps, which became the jeepneys. So what happened to the plan? The Quezon City plan was here in the Diliman quadrangle with the ellipse. The military, the generals of the government at the time said that it would be overrun very quickly because it was flat. They had to look for another option for the capital, and that was in this area. This is the 1947 NPC plan. But at that point, we had already become an independent country. We had a government, a republic, and because we had a republic and the Senate, we formed a committee. So the committee said, let's look for another option, not just Quezon City. So they looked at 17 options including Baguio, Cebu, Davao, McKinley, Pasay, Tagaytay. They even looked, and this is the compilation at the time of the committee, voluminous, it's like thick report. They even looked at the geographical center of the Philippines as the possible capital. Anyone can guess? It's in the waters, in the shallow waters of a little-known island at the time called Boracay. So if they had chosen that, then our president would have loved it. He would have got up very early in the morning, for him about 11 o'clock, worn his shorts, and he's in the Malacanang of the South. But of course, Boracay at the time had no transport, no water, no electricity. They ended up back in Quezon City. And so you had the 1949 capital plan by Arellano Croft and Al Quinto, another Harvard graduate. And they took the Quezon City plan and blew it up even bigger because at the time the technology was cars. And so they spoiled everything to such a huge size that the city now started from the valley of Marikina all the way to the North Diversion Road and present-day Caloocan. The thought was to create a large civic center that would be the pride of Filipinos, where the sun would come up over the verdant Marikina Valley and travel across the 99-meter wide Avenue of the Republic and set on the other side. So the elements of government were to be the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary again. What happened? And we even had a Quezon City International Airport. Of course, when this was made public, again, the prices of land shot up through the roof once more, and they could not accumulate enough land to build anything. And so you ended up with this. This is EDSA. This is rush hour in 1955. And EDSA was just an asphalt road. So what happened? Because of the failure of Quezon City, although they did build houses, not enough, and shoddily built, the roofs are asbestos. They still are, some of them. They could not house everyone. They started to build the Capitol, a high-rise building. They spent 2 million pesos. They ran out of money. And this was lying there for about 15 years before it got turned into the structure of Batasan Pambansa. So what happened? Quezon City was being unbuilt. Manila was left empty, and so they turned the original civic center into a public space, which became the popular Luneta Park. And the failure of government led to the success of private development. And these fellows, Mr. McMicking and Colonel Fernando, if I'm not mistaken, that's Ayala Avenue, that's Insular Life. and Makati was built. And because they built it, they came. So instead of going to Quezon City, they went to Makati. And if you look at the same, the template that the Ayalas used, it's a large avenue surrounded by buildings, exactly the same plan that was supposed to have been built for Quezon City, but because the government did not have the money, private developers built it and they came. And they also built a commercial center. That's the Rizal Theater, which was supposed to be in the Luneta in 1961 to celebrate the birth centennial of Rizal, but they ran out of funds. So again, private resources had to build what civic sources could not raise. Same with our coliseums and our sports palaces, Araneta, and also our housing. So we had all of these subdivisions take the place of what should have been provided by government. Again, the failure of government led to the success of private developers. And this is how you said, "I love you forever" at the time. But other people love Manila. This is Mayor Yeba Villegas, and he wanted to turn Manila, which was not anymore the capital of the Philippines, Quezon City was at the time, into a modern and progressive city, much like New York is to Washington, D.C. So he commissioned a plan to make Intramuros a modern district, which never pushed through. Although he started to demolish and he removed all of the piedra china, the cobblestone in the streets, and turned them into concrete streets, which was a sign of progress and modernity. But he did try and implement plans. The Bilibid was supposed to have been turned into a park, would have been good, except that the Bilibid is actually a heritage structure. And to solve the parking in Manila, he proposed bridges that were also parking structures, which is something that could be thought of today. So we had a lot of plans, even underground underpasses, which was built. The first was Lacson Underpass, was supposed to be one of many built in Manila, but only one was ever built. And as early as 1962, we were looking at, ahead of everybody else, mass transport systems, including monorails. This is a perspective from 1962. It was not built, and it had to wait another 12 years for the LRT. Even the reclamation in the bay was proposed as early as the 1960s. This is the Bay Walk, which is now being done because of the demolition or destruction that happened during the last earthquake. So what happened to Quezon City? Nothing. That's why you had wide expanses. I grew up in Quezon City wondering why there were all these wide spaces and nothing there. It was because government did not have enough money. And so they tried to build the city. They didn't have enough funds. The sewage didn't work. It always flooded, even in the upper areas. The water was lacking, and power and telephones, you had to wait years to get them. So what happened in Manila? They threw all of the industry outside of the city boundaries. It ended up in Makati and Mandaluyong. This is EDSA. This is now the EDSA Siang and Mega Mall. So what happened in the martial law era was they tried to revive those grand master plans, and under Imelda as governor of Metro Manila, and in fact, that's how Manila should be governed as a province. She commissioned a series of plans, and of course, with very grandiose titles like Towards the City of Man. So the 9 and 10 master plans are from 1975 to 1986 under Metro Manila Commission City of Man plans. And these are some of the drawings from that, the several volumes that was produced, including urbanization. And this is the transport system showing the C6 and SLEX, and even the flood control program, which consisted of the Mangahan floodway and the unbuilt Parañaque floodway. It was supposed to have worked, but didn't because they ran out of funds. So what happened again in 1973, and this is probably the 10th, if I'm not mistaken, the revival of the national government center plans. They identified 2 sites, Quezon City, the Batasan area, and this site. This is the Batasan area, and eventually it was chosen, and the Batasan Pambansa complex was built, at least only one part of it. And that's where the congressmen are. But on the other side, Malacanang was supposed to have been built on a reclaimed area And this is the reclaimed area for the NGC in the Manila Cavite Reclamation Site. And that is now, because Manila didn't have the money, the government didn't have the money, it's now the Mall of Asia. So again, the failure of government to fully implement its plans led to acts of desperation, selling off government land and screwing up all of the proposals to rationally build our metropolis. So what do we have? We have a metropolis that is constantly besieged by recurring problems, flooding, pollution, crime, misgovernance. We know what the problems are, yet we cannot even dismantle the governance structure of 17 towns and cities and mayors who don't talk to each other. So we've known flooding has occurred for centuries, as shown in this lithograph from the 18th century, and this from 1970, showing that we had already mapped, even before GIS or the satellites, where all the flooding was and had attempted to solve it. So what I did is I took matters into my own hands. So I posted this solution for a post-Ondoy Barangay Center, which is 4 stories with a helipad at the top for rescue, solar panels to charge your cell phone batteries, and lifeboats on both sides. When I posted this on the net, they said I was biased towards the poor, so I also did one for the middle class. This is the entrance to a subdivision, and the roof of the guardhouse you can flip. That becomes your... But it just shows you that all of our disasters affect everyone now. It's not just the poor or the informal settlers, but even the formal sector of the city. So that's why essentially we're all informal settlers in the metropolis. So what we have now is a Mangahan, which is essentially a residential subdivision for the informal settlers. And we have islands of wealth amidst all of that want. And everyone desperate for space because it's not provided, they have to provide for themselves. So informal settlers going into every nook and cranny of the metropolis because they have to survive. So these are the islands of wealth in a sea of want. This is Taguig, C5, and that's Fort Bonifacio. And what we do also is we have no regard for our heritage. We tear them down. We tear down our links to the past or any links to rationality in all of the 11 plans that were provided for Metro Manila, which never was implemented. And what replaces our architecture today is the architecture of billboards and frameworks of steel that replace our old version of aesthetics or beauty. So this is the mindset of our planners today, or the people that set the direction for our physical development. And let me end with a quote from Burnham, because his words strike true today. 100 years ago, he said, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to steer men's blood, and probably in themselves will not be realized. Make big plans, aim high in scope, in hope and work, remembering that a noble logical diagram, once recorded, will never die." This was from his report. A few years later, before he passed away in 1912, someone from Manila wrote him about changing his plans. So this is what he wrote back right before he died. "If this general plan of a capital of 800,000 people," this is just Manila, "is not satisfactory, a new plan should be made, but any plan, once adopted, should be rightly adhered to. For unless this is done, no plan will ever be carried out." And his last words were, "and disorder will be the rule." So today, disorder is the rule. And with that, thank you very much.